Ayana was born in the quiet heart of a village that rested like a jewel between rolling hills and dense forests. Her home, a modest clay and straw dwelling, stood at the edge of a small stream that murmured softly, carrying tales from the distant mountains. From a young age, Ayana exuded a quiet grace that seemed to set her apart from other children. She had a serene presence, the kind that made people naturally gravitate toward her, seeking her gentle smile or the warmth of her laughter. It was not a loud or boisterous joy that drew attention, but a quiet steadiness that radiated from within, as if she carried a light that needed no candle. Her family was humble. Her father, a skilled woodworker, carved furniture and tools with meticulous care, each piece a testament to his patience and dedication. He often worked late into the night, the rhythmic tap of his chisel echoing through the home. Her mother, a weaver, spent her days spinning threads into colorful fabrics that adorned the homes of villagers and travelers alike. From them, Ayana inherited not only practical skills but also a deep appreciation for patience, precision, and the beauty found in ordinary labor. The household, though poor by material standards, was rich in warmth, discipline, and moral grounding. Ayana's early years were filled with small, meaningful lessons. She learned to recognize the value of empathy, helping neighbors carry water from the well or tending to a sick child while their mother worked in the fields. Even as a little girl, she displayed a remarkable awareness of the struggles of others. If someone tripped or fell, Ayana was the first to extend a hand, not out of obligation but out of genuine concern. These gestures, though simple, quickly built her reputation in the village as a young person of unusual kindness and composure. Despite her gentle nature, Ayana was also fiercely determined. She approached her daily tasks with a diligence that belied her age. Whether helping her father smooth the grain of a wooden chair or assisting her mother with intricate patterns in the weaving loom, she threw herself into her work with dedication. When obstacles arose, a broken loom, a splintered piece of wood, or a crop that failed due to erratic weather, Ayana met them with a steady resolve, refusing to succumb to frustration. Villagers would often watch her silently, noting her perseverance, whispering to one another about the strength in the young girl who carried herself as though the weight of the world was a challenge she was eager to meet. As Ayana grew, so too did her reputation. Children admired her, imitating her helpfulness and learning from her example, while elders saw in her a rare combination of humility and strength. She was the type of person who inspired trust without demanding it. When disputes arose among neighbors, Ayana often found herself mediating with surprising insight, suggesting solutions that seemed simple but bore lasting fairness. Her words were measured, never harsh, yet they carried an authority that commanded attention. Those who initially doubted her judgment soon came to respect it, leaving many to quietly marvel at her innate wisdom despite her youth. However, as Ayana's virtues became more apparent, envy began to stir in the hearts of some villagers. In communities like hers, where social standing was often defined by lineage, wealth, or influence, her qualities of kindness, resilience, and intelligence posed an unspoken challenge to those who sought to dominate through pride or malice. Certain individuals, noticing the attention Ayana received, whispered behind her back, casting doubts on her character and intentions. They spoke of her unnatural poise and the way her presence could quiet a room or inspire cooperation. They feared that such qualities, if left unchecked, could shift the balance of respect and power in ways unfavorable to them. Among these envious villagers were a few who had long benefited from their social standing, maintaining authority through intimidation or subtle coercion. To them, Ayana's rise, even as a young girl, threatened their carefully maintained hierarchy. Every act of generosity she performed, every task she completed with diligence, became in their eyes a challenge, a quiet assertion that virtue could outshine power. This envy, however, was hidden beneath polite words and seemingly cordial gestures. Behind closed doors, murmurs of resentment and plans to undermine her began to form, as subtle and pervasive as the roots of the oldest trees in the village square. Yet Ayana remained largely unaware of these stirrings of malice. She focused instead on her immediate world, the family that nurtured her, the friends who played and learned with her, and the broader community she quietly served. Her humility shielded her from pride, and her empathy protected her from cynicism. She noticed the small acts of kindness and the needs of those around her far more than the whispers of envy. Perhaps this was part of her enduring charm. She was grounded in reality yet uplifted by a moral compass that seemed almost innate. Her education was informal but deeply rich. She learned to read the stars from her father, interpreting the subtle movements of the night sky to anticipate weather or predict the best time for planting. She learned the language of herbs and roots from her mother, understanding the properties of each plant for healing, nourishment, or protection. These lessons, passed down through generations, gave Ayana a profound connection to the natural world, an understanding that extended beyond mere survival into a form of practical wisdom that benefited the entire village. People began to notice how her presence brought subtle order and reassurance to everyday chaos. Ayana's social interactions reflected her blend of grace and determination. She spoke to elders with deference, yet with an unmistakable clarity of thought. She assisted the weak and sick without expectation of reward. When tasked with responsibilities beyond her years, she approached them with care, meticulousness, and creativity. Such actions slowly wove her into the fabric of village life in a way that made her indispensable. And yet, the very qualities that endeared her to the majority also drew the silent gaze of those who wished to undermine her. Even in her moments of solitude, Ayana's mind was alive with contemplation and observation. She often wandered along the riverbank or through the fields, reflecting on the interconnectedness of life and the unspoken rules of human behavior. She pondered justice, compassion, and the nature of strength, not just physical but moral and spiritual. In these quiet moments she developed an inner resilience, a sense that even if the world around her acted unjustly, she could maintain her integrity and influence through her actions and presence alone. By the time Ayana reached her early teens, her reputation was well established. Villagers spoke of her not only for her helpful deeds but for her remarkable ability to remain calm under pressure. A sudden storm that would have sent others into panic found her calmly guiding her family and neighbors, directing the safety of livestock, and ensuring that homes were secured. Her strategic mind, paired with an empathetic heart, made her a natural leader in emergent situations, a fact not lost on the more calculating eyes of those who sought control through fear or cunning. Even her appearance seemed to mirror the qualities within her. Ayana moved with measured grace, her steps deliberate yet light. Her eyes carried the quiet intelligence of someone attuned to the world, and her voice, soft yet firm, commanded attention when she chose to speak. Such physical attributes, coupled with her moral and emotional qualities, created an aura that many described as regal, even though she was of humble origins. To those who truly knew her, she was simply Ayana, steadfast, kind, and brave. And so, while Ayana's reputation grew as a beacon of resilience and kindness, the seeds of envy among certain villagers continued to sprout in hidden ways. They could not diminish her spirit, but they could scheme and plot, their intentions laying the groundwork for future trials that would test her courage, ingenuity, and the depth of her innate strength. Little did anyone know that the girl who quietly carried the village's hope and admiration in her heart would soon face challenges designed to shake even her remarkable composure, challenges that would reveal the extraordinary power and resilience that lay within her. Ayana's life, framed by humility yet illuminated by her quiet virtues, set the stage for the extraordinary events to come. Her everyday acts of kindness, patience, and moral clarity not only defined her character but also set in motion the envy, curiosity, and awe that would later lead to trials, triumphs, and a legacy that would echo long beyond the boundaries of her village. The day of the ceremony arrived with a tense stillness that seemed to hang over the village like a heavy, gray veil. Villagers moved about with a mixture of anticipation and unease, sensing the undercurrent of rivalry that had grown around Ayana. In the quiet shadows of an alley behind her home, her enemies gathered with cruel precision. Their eyes gleamed with malicious intent as they glanced at the unassuming pair of shoes Ayana had left by the doorstep, unaware of the danger that lurked. The shoes were simple but elegant, crafted carefully by the village cobbler and imbued with small charms of protection that Ayana's grandmother had sewn into the fabric. To her rivals, however, they were nothing more than a tool, a symbol through which they could humiliate her and disrupt her dignity. One of the men knelt by the shoes, pulling at them with a forceful grip, while another fetched a bundle of dry twigs and kindling, his movements deliberate, calculated to ensure the flames would catch immediately. The air smelled faintly of smoke even before the fire leapt to life, a scent that carried with it the promise of cruelty. Ayana's enemies exchanged triumphant glances, certain that by destroying her shoes, they would render her unworthy to participate in the ceremony. "She will walk barefoot like the lowly," whispered one, his voice a venomous hiss. Another laughed softly, the sound cruel in its satisfaction. They piled the kindling around the shoes and struck a spark. Flames leapt hungrily, curling around the leather and fabric, crackling and spitting sparks into the dry earth. The shoes blackened instantly, the fire consuming the polished exterior and the delicate stitching with ruthless efficiency. For a moment, the men paused to savor the spectacle, the heat rising in waves as if mocking Ayana herself. The wood crackled and snapped, smoke curling into the sky, carrying the scent of their malice. Every sound of the burning shoes, the leather shrinking, the fabric smoking, the charred soles cracking, was a note in a cruel symphony meant to shame her. They imagined her arriving at the ceremony, stumbling, humiliated and exposed, and their smug satisfaction seemed complete. Yet Ayana was not oblivious. She had felt the sudden heat rise from the back of her house earlier, smelled the acrid smoke curling toward her window. Even before she rushed outside, a strange unease settled in her chest, a mixture of fear and the quiet anticipation that something extraordinary was about to unfold. She had faced hardship before, mockery, envy, even small betrayals, but her heart had never been conquered. When she saw the flames dancing around her shoes, her initial shock melted into a steady, calm resolve. The enemies froze as her shadow fell over the fire, her presence commanding and serene despite her slight frame. Smoke swirled around her, but instead of recoiling, she stepped forward, feeling a connection with the earth beneath her feet and the air around her. The glow of determination in her eyes was almost tangible, a quiet flame that mirrored the inferno consuming her footwear. A single breath, deep and deliberate, drew her focus inward. Ayana knelt beside the fire for a moment, her hand hovering above the glowing embers, yet not in fear. The flames licked upward, but they did not burn her. Instead, she felt a strange warmth that seemed to mingle with her own energy, as if the fire recognized her spirit. She picked up the scorched shoes cautiously, and a faint light shimmered along the edges of her palms, illuminating the cracked leather. Her enemies stepped back instinctively, a tremor of unease running through them. The cruelty they had meticulously planned suddenly seemed fragile and impotent in the face of her calm authority. When she stood, barefoot, the fire's glow reflected in her eyes. Her hair caught the light, giving the impression of a halo, and her posture radiated dignity. The villagers, who had begun to gather at the sound of the commotion, gasped as they witnessed the scene. The fire had been intended to degrade her, but in the presence of Ayana, it only seemed to highlight her strength, her unwavering resolve, and the grace that no act of malice could diminish. Even the rivals who had expected to watch her shame, felt a shiver of fear and awe. The flames had been their weapon, their tool of humiliation, yet it was she who commanded the moment. The crackling fire became a backdrop, a stage upon which her resilience and quiet majesty were illuminated. Though the shoes were destroyed, it mattered little. Ayana's essence, her presence, and the unyielding spirit within her bones could never be scorched by mere fire. The ceremony awaited, and as she walked toward it, the embers of her destroyed shoes fading behind her, the villagers whispered among themselves. They spoke not of humiliation but of power, of a quiet, unstoppable strength. Ayana's enemies, meanwhile, could only glare, powerless against the glow of her courage. In that moment it became clear, true dignity cannot be stolen, and true resilience turns even the cruelest act into a testament of inner power. Ayana's bare feet pressed against the cool earth, the scent of smoke still lingering in the air around her. The fire had consumed her shoes, but it had not consumed her spirit. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep, steadying breath, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat echo through her chest. In the quiet that followed the crackling flames, she allowed herself to remember the lessons whispered to her in childhood, the words of her grandmother, and the quiet strength embedded in her family line. Each memory was a thread, weaving together a tapestry of resilience that no act of cruelty could unravel. She recalled the stories of women in her lineage who had faced impossible odds, who had endured humiliation, hardship, and even betrayal, yet emerged not broken but radiant with a power that transcended mere survival. These ancestors had faced envy, injustice, and violence, and through it all they had held on to their dignity. Ayana felt their presence like a gentle current flowing beneath her skin, a pulse of courage that seemed to thrum in harmony with the earth beneath her feet. Their voices, though silent, spoke to her in the language of fortitude. Do not bow to malice, do not surrender to fear, walk forward with your head held high. Even as the villagers whispered and her enemies glared, Ayana's mind reached inward. She thought of her mother's gentle hands, teaching her to rise above pettiness and to find beauty in small acts of kindness. She remembered the hours spent in quiet reflection beneath the moonlight, learning to listen to the subtle rhythms of nature and the strength that came from harmonizing with it. In these recollections she found an unshakable anchor, a center of calm from which courage radiated outward like ripples across a still pond. Her resolve was not merely the absence of fear, it was an active force, a conscious choice to refuse submission to cruelty. The fire had been intended to break her, to turn her humiliation into spectacle, but she recognized that power lay not in destruction but in perception. Those who sought to degrade her could burn her possessions, they could whisper lies and concoct schemes, but they could not touch the essence of who she was. That essence was grounded in something far older and stronger than the fleeting ambitions of men. It was rooted in lineage, belief, and the deep knowledge that life itself demanded courage and integrity. Ayana's thoughts turned to her personal beliefs, the convictions she had cultivated through years of reflection and experience. She believed in justice, in the idea that cruelty ultimately carries its own consequences, and that acts intended to harm can often reveal the true strength of the victim. She believed in the subtle magic of intention, the invisible threads connecting past, present, and future, and how one act of steadfastness could ripple outward, influencing not just her own fate but that of the entire community. This belief was her armor, invisible yet impenetrable, shielding her heart from despair and her mind from doubt. With every breath, Ayana felt the fire's heat dissolve into a warm current of energy that ran through her veins, as though the flames themselves had imbued her with new vitality. Pain and fear were present, yes, but they were tempered by clarity. She had survived the first trial, and in doing so, had discovered a strength she had not known she possessed. The humiliation designed to break her became a proving ground, shaping her resilience like water shaping stone, smoothing the rough edges of doubt and fear into facets of unyielding determination. She allowed herself a small, quiet smile. It was not the boastful grin of triumph but the serene acknowledgement of power reclaimed. Every glance from the villagers, every whisper from her enemies, was absorbed and deflected by the steadfastness she had nurtured for years. In that moment she understood that true strength is not measured by vengeance or dominance, but by the capacity to remain unbroken, compassionate, and purposeful in the face of deliberate cruelty. As she prepared to move forward, her bare feet brushing over the scorched earth, Ayana felt a deep connection to the life force around her. The wind whispering through the trees, the hum of the soil beneath her toes, the distant song of birds greeting the day. Nature itself seemed to recognize her resolve, lending its quiet power to her steps. She did not need shoes to walk with dignity, she needed only the courage within, a courage that had been tested and proven in the fire of both literal flames and human malice. Ayana lifted her head, eyes gleaming with the quiet fire of determination. She would not bend, she would not falter. Every step she would take from this moment onward would be a testament to her inner strength, a signal to her adversaries that cruelty could not dictate the path of one who walks in harmony with courage and conviction. The glow of her spirit, though unseen, was palpable, a beacon that would guide her forward through every trial to come. In that still, charged moment she made a silent vow. She would walk through fire, walk over ashes, endure scorn, and emerge unbroken, radiant, and unassailable. Her resolve was absolute. Nothing could take it from her. Ayana stood at the edge of the smoldering pile, the blackened remains of her once delicate shoes stretching out before her. The ashes were still warm, a faint haze rising into the cool morning air, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and charred leather. Around her, the villagers and rivals gathered in uneasy silence, their eyes wide with anticipation and hidden dread. They had expected to see her cower, to witness the humiliation of a girl who had been stripped of comfort, dignity, and security. What they did not expect was the aura of power that seemed to emanate from her very being, a subtle glow that made the ashes beneath her feet shimmer as if recognizing her unbroken spirit. Her bare feet pressed lightly against the coarse remnants of fire, and a shiver ran through her, not of fear but of awareness. Each step was deliberate, measured, and filled with the quiet certainty of someone who had endured more than mere physical trials. The warmth of the ashes was nothing compared to the fire of her inner strength, a strength that refused to be diminished by cruelty or envy. Her toes sank slightly into the soft, cooling embers, yet instead of pain, a sense of connection washed over her, as though the ashes themselves were acknowledging her endurance, her resilience, and her rightful place among the proud hearts of the village. As Ayana lifted her foot and placed it forward, the crowd's murmurs swelled into gasps. They watched in stunned silence as she moved with a grace that defied the harshness beneath her soles. Each step was a statement, a quiet declaration of sovereignty over her own life and dignity. She did not stumble, she did not falter. She did not flinch at the heat or the rough texture. Her movements were fluid, almost regal, as though she were performing a dance of defiance and triumph, a ritual of reclamation that belonged not to the village but to herself and the lineage of strength she carried in her veins. The villagers exchanged wary glances. Mothers held their children closer, whispering prayers or superstitious warnings, while elders tilted their heads, trying to discern the source of this strange power. Even Ayana's enemies, the very ones who had hoped to break her, felt a tremor of unease ripple through them. The blinding confidence in her posture, the unwavering focus in her eyes, and the serene rhythm of her steps suggested a force far beyond ordinary human resilience. It was as if the ashes themselves had been transformed by her presence, no longer remnants of punishment but a consecrated path upon which she walked as a queen of her own making. Ayana's mind was calm and centered, yet every nerve in her body was alive with heightened awareness. She felt the textures of the ash, the faint warmth of the earth beneath, the whisper of the breeze that carried the scent of smoke. She drew upon every lesson from her past, her grandmother's teachings, her mother's encouragement, the quiet meditations under the moonlight, and blended them into a single coherent strength that guided each step. It was not anger that propelled her forward, it was purpose. Not revenge but reclamation. She was not walking to punish those who had wronged her but to demonstrate the immutable power of dignity and courage. The crowd could not tear their eyes away. Some covered their mouths in shock, others fell to their knees in awe or fear. The moment stretched like a suspended breath, as if time itself had paused to witness the extraordinary. Ayana's bare feet glided over the embers, leaving no marks of pain, only a trail of quiet authority and unshakable resolve. Every movement was both delicate and commanding, a paradox that left onlookers struggling to comprehend the depth of what they were witnessing. Her enemies, once smug and certain of their dominance, now felt an unfamiliar sting, not physical but spiritual. The humiliation they had intended to impose upon her had rebounded in a way they could not have foreseen. Their own intentions, their envy and malice, seemed powerless against the purity of Ayana's resolve. With each step she took, the balance of power shifted, not through violence or aggression, but through the undeniable presence of someone who had refused to be diminished. By the time she reached the other side of the ashes, a hush had fallen over the entire assembly. The village, which had once doubted her, now looked upon her with reverence. Her walk was more than a display of courage. It was a transformative moment, one that redefined their understanding of strength, endurance, and dignity. Ayana had walked through fire, literally and figuratively, and emerged not only unscathed but luminous in the eyes of all who watched. She paused, turning her gaze upon the crowd, letting her calm yet piercing eyes meet theirs. It was a silent message. Cruelty cannot define her, envy cannot contain her, and suffering cannot diminish the light that resides in those who endure with integrity. Her journey across the ashes had been a trial, a testament, and a coronation all at once. The embers that had been meant to shame her now served as a pedestal, elevating her above fear and scorn, proclaiming her strength and unyielding spirit. In that moment, Ayana was not merely a girl who had been humiliated, she had become a symbol. A symbol that the fire of adversity, no matter how cruelly applied, could forge resilience instead of defeat. She walked like a queen because she carried within her the dignity, courage, and grace of generations, and no ashes, however hot, could erase that inheritance. The villagers would tell this story for years to come, a story of humiliation transformed into majesty, of cruelty converted into awe, of a young girl who walked through fire and emerged unbroken, radiant, and exalted. The story of Ayana's walk through the ashes traveled faster than any wind could carry a whisper. From the first stunned onlookers in the village square to those who had only heard fragmented tales, the narrative spread like wildfire, growing in magnitude with every retelling. Mothers clutched their children closer, speaking in hushed tones about the young girl who had defied fire itself. The elders, who had once scoffed at her quiet strength, now shook their heads in disbelief, murmuring prayers and speculating in tones that mixed awe with fear. In the weeks following the ceremony, the village seemed alive with a tension that was both thrilling and unsettling. People spoke of Ayana's glowing presence as though it were more than human, a visible proof that she carried a blessing far older and wiser than anyone could understand. Some whispered that she was protected by the spirits of their ancestors, others claimed the fire itself had recognized her nobility and yielded to it, and still others wondered if she had been touched by the gods themselves. Every version of the story magnified the miraculous nature of what had occurred, and with each telling Ayana's reputation grew, threading itself into the fabric of the village's collective consciousness. There was a mixture of reactions. Fear threaded through many hearts, particularly among those who had sought to diminish her or who had harbored envy. They spoke in guarded tones, avoiding her gaze, worrying that even casual contact might draw some unknowable consequence. Some avoided walking near her home, wary that her presence could bring both blessing and misfortune, uncertain which might arrive first. This fear, though tinged with superstition, gave Ayana an aura of untouchable power, an unspoken respect that even her rivals could not deny. Yet awe and reverence flourished alongside fear. Villagers who had once dismissed her as quiet, unassuming, or ordinary now saw her in a different light. Women gathered to recount the story of the fire and the ashes, holding their children close as they pointed toward Ayana's modest home, insisting that she was chosen for a purpose beyond ordinary understanding. Men nodded in silent agreement, bowing their heads in acknowledgement whenever she passed, unsure if the gesture was for protection, respect, or both. Even the village elders, who had once doubted her entirely, now consulted her before certain decisions, feeling that her insight was accompanied by a spiritual clarity no one else could claim. The marketplace too became a place of quiet wonder. Children, wide-eyed and curious, whispered tales to one another about the girl who walked through fire like a queen. Some attempted to recreate her walk with small piles of ashes, though none could replicate her poise or the commanding air that had so bewitched the adult villagers. Merchants and tradespeople spoke of her softly, careful not to appear too familiar lest they incur some unseen consequence. In the evenings, the central square would hum with hushed conversation, as storytellers and elders alike expanded the narrative, adding layers of mystique while remaining careful not to misrepresent the young girl's dignity. Among the most striking reactions were those of the rival families, the very individuals who had sought to humiliate her in the first place. They lingered on the outskirts of gatherings, watching her with a mixture of envy, fear, and begrudging admiration. Their whispered speculations were punctuated by frantic attempts to downplay the event, to remind themselves that it was mere happenstance rather than some supernatural favor. Yet deep inside even they could not deny the truth of what they had witnessed. The defiance, the grace, the undeniable authority Ayana displayed, even in the most harrowing circumstances. Stories of her resilience and the ashes became entwined with tales of divine protection. Elders who specialized in spiritual counsel began to speak in cryptic terms, noting that some individuals are born with a purpose that transcends ordinary life. Ayana's calm demeanor, her unshakable focus, and her humility, combined with the miraculous nature of the ashwalk, suggested to many that she was destined to be more than a simple village girl. Pilgrims from nearby settlements even traveled to see her, some seeking blessings, others curious to witness the supposed glow of her inner strength firsthand. Despite the reverence, Ayana herself remained grounded. She did not boast or flaunt her resilience. She moved quietly among the villagers, helping where she could and speaking only when necessary. Yet her presence was magnetic, drawing both admiration and caution. People could feel her strength without needing to see it performed again, as though the memory of her walk through the ashes had embedded itself in the collective spirit of the village. Each glance at her reminded them that true courage and dignity could not be destroyed, even when they were tested by cruelty or fire. And so the whispers continued, growing richer with each retelling. Some called her a miracle, others a blessing, and some even spoke of her as a living testament to the power of endurance, humility, and resilience. The mixture of fear, reverence, and astonishment created a tension that lingered long after the ashes had cooled. Ayana's story, though still unfolding, had already begun to change the village, reminding them that strength is often quiet, grace can be unassuming, and those who endure with courage carry a light that cannot be extinguished, even by fire. The morning sun had barely risen when Ayana's enemies gathered, their faces twisted with fury and disbelief. The embers of the previous night's humiliation still burned in their minds, not in the fire they had set, but in the shock of seeing Ayana rise unbroken from the ashes. Whispers of her mystical strength had already traveled through the village, and now they faced the girl who seemed untouchable, whose courage and dignity had turned their cruel intentions into a spectacle that only magnified her power. The three rivals approached with rigid steps, their voices sharp and commanding. "How dare you defy us?" one spat, his eyes scanning the crowd for support, finding only wary glances and murmured respect for Ayana. Their plan to humiliate her further, to remind the village that she could be controlled, felt suddenly fragile in the light of what they had witnessed. But they were determined, envy and pride would not allow them to back down. Ayana stood in the village square, the sun glinting off her hair, her posture calm and unwavering. Her hands were folded at her sides, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, an authority that did not need to be loud to be felt. She did not speak at first, letting the tension build, her eyes fixed on her adversaries, not with fear, but with a steady awareness that they were powerless against what she had become. The first enemy stepped forward, attempting to sneer, to mock, to impose shame once more. "You walk among us as if nothing happened, but we—" he began, only to falter as Ayana's gaze held him in a way that made him shrink inwardly. The air seemed to vibrate subtly around her, a faint shimmer like the residue of moonlight on her skin, an echo of the glow from the night she had walked on the ashes. No words were needed to assert dominance. Her presence alone conveyed that any attempt to harm her would fail. "You cannot shame me again," Ayana finally said, her voice calm but firm, carrying an authority that startled the onlookers. "The fire did not burn me. The ashes did not weaken me. Your cruelty cannot touch what has been strengthened by endurance and truth." Each word landed with precision, echoing across the square and piercing the arrogance of her enemies. The villagers watched in awe as the rival's anger turned to hesitation, their certainty dissolving under the weight of her conviction. In a desperate attempt to reclaim control, they advanced, attempting to shout, gesture, and intimidate. They accused her of arrogance, of being ungrateful, of seeking power over them. Yet each effort to belittle her seemed only to amplify her calmness and resolve. It was as if the fire and ashes had imprinted a new kind of strength into her very being, a resilience that no mockery, threat, or intimidation could undo. Their words fell flat, bouncing off an invisible shield forged from suffering, courage, and the mystical blessing that had protected her the night before. Ayana's eyes swept across the villagers, who now watched silently, caught between fear and admiration. She understood their hesitation, their awe, and the caution that came from witnessing someone whose spirit refused to be crushed. Her enemies, once sure of their dominance, now staggered under the weight of what they had unleashed. Each attempt to assert authority or force shame met with nothing but quiet defiance, exposing the futility of cruelty when confronted with unwavering inner strength. The rival who had first struck out, intent on humiliation, finally froze. His anger melted into disbelief as he saw the full extent of Ayana's power, both mystical and personal. The fire, the ashes, and her serene composure had transformed her, and now there was no place left for intimidation or deceit. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of her chin, the steadying of her breath, the calm patience in her gaze, spoke of a force that transcended human manipulation. "You will learn," Ayana said softly, yet every word carried the authority of someone who had faced destruction and emerged stronger, "that cruelty cannot diminish what is rooted in truth and courage. You cannot break me, for my strength has been tempered in fire and shadow, in the ashes that were meant to humiliate, and yet have crowned me." The square was silent, save for the whisper of the wind and the occasional murmur of villagers witnessing a moment that felt sacred, as if justice itself had taken a physical form. The enemies faltered, their plans unraveling, their schemes rendered powerless in the face of Ayana's unyielding presence. They had intended to dominate and humiliate, but instead they had revealed their own weakness, their envy and cruelty now exposed for all to see. The villagers, sensing the shift, began to murmur words of awe and respect, acknowledging that true power did not lie in domination or fear but in resilience, courage, and the unbreakable spirit that Ayana had shown. In that moment, Ayana did not need to strike, shout, or punish. Her defiance was complete, her victory absolute. The rivals, humiliated not by her action but by their own impotence, retreated with a mixture of shame, fear, and reluctant admiration. The villagers turned to Ayana with quiet reverence, understanding that she had walked through both fire and human cruelty, emerging unbowed, radiant, and sovereign in spirit. The echoes of that confrontation lingered long after the day had ended. It became a story told and retold, a lesson etched into the minds of all who had witnessed it. Cruelty cannot crush the courageous, envy cannot overpower the pure of heart, and mystical strength, when paired with resilience and dignity, cannot be challenged. Ayana had walked through ashes like a queen, and now she ruled not by fear or violence, but by the undeniable power of endurance and grace. The morning after Ayana's awe-inspiring walk through the ashes, the village was alive with a different kind of energy. The whispers that had once carried fear and doubt now rang with reverence and astonishment. People gathered in small clusters, exchanging accounts of what they had seen. No one could deny the extraordinary spectacle. A girl who had been subjected to cruelty had risen from it not only unscathed but transformed. Her steps over the blackened remains of her shoes had carried a glow that seemed to linger in the air, a faint shimmer that clung to her as she moved, a visible trace of her resilience and latent power. The elders, who had orchestrated or at least acquiesced to the cruel act, convened in the central square. Their faces, usually stern and unyielding, now bore signs of unease. They had long believed that control and fear were the pillars of respect, that humiliation was a proper tool to enforce hierarchy and obedience. Yet, in the wake of Ayana's defiance, their authority had been subtly shaken. The child they had underestimated had displayed a power far beyond the physical, an aura of dignity and resilience that none could question. The village healer, an elderly woman with eyes clouded by age yet keen with insight, stepped forward. She had witnessed the glow of Ayana's bones in the moonlight, a miraculous sign she recognized as an ancestral blessing. "This child," she murmured to the gathering elders, her voice trembling with awe, "carries within her the strength of our forebears. The fire did not consume her, nor did the ashes diminish her. The power that guided her steps is a gift we must honor, not fear." Her words carried weight, piercing the fog of arrogance that had settled over the council for generations. Ayana herself approached the assembly, her posture calm and steady. She did not rush, did not bow unnecessarily, nor did she display the slightest trace of fear or resentment. Every step she took conveyed an unspoken lesson. True power is measured not by domination over others, but by resilience in the face of injustice. As she stood before the elders, the villagers noticed the subtle radiance that seemed to emanate from her, a glow that was no longer just physical but spiritual, connecting her to a deeper current of life and ancestral blessing. The village leader, a man whose judgments were usually final and rarely questioned, cleared his throat. His voice, though hesitant, carried the authority of his position. "Ayana," he began, "we have witnessed your courage. What was intended to shame you has instead revealed the strength within you. We recognize that the fire and ashes, meant to humiliate, have instead illuminated a force we cannot deny." His words were deliberate, a formal acknowledgement that the old hierarchies and methods of punishment had failed in the face of true character and mystical favor. One by one, respected figures of the village, the elder farmers, the teachers, the spiritual guides, stepped forward to affirm the same. Their voices, though varied in tone and cadence, harmonized into a chorus of acknowledgement. They spoke of her courage, her unwavering dignity, and the undeniable blessing that seemed to accompany her. "She has endured what no one should endure and has emerged stronger," one elder stated. "We are witnesses to a miracle, and it demands our recognition, our respect, and our protection." The shift was palpable. Where once fear and contempt had marked Ayana's days, now respect and admiration filled the air. Villagers who had previously whispered cruelly or cast doubtful glances now bowed with sincere reverence. Children looked at her with awe, seeing in her a model of perseverance, a living testament to the idea that adversity could be transformed into power and grace. Even those who had envied her or sought to humiliate her were forced to reconsider, their anger tempered by recognition of her unmatched dignity. Ayana, though deeply aware of the attention, remained humble. She spoke softly but with clarity, addressing both the elders and the villagers. "The fire and the ashes were not what made me strong," she said, her voice steady. "It was the courage to endure, the will to rise above cruelty, and the blessings of those who came before me. Let this be a lesson. True power is not in harming others, but in standing tall when the world seeks to break you." Her words resonated through the square, settling into the hearts of all who heard them. The elders, sensing the necessity of formal recognition, declared a new ordinance. Acts of humiliation would no longer be sanctioned, and cruelty as a method of control was to be abolished. Ayana's courage had not only protected her own dignity but had transformed the village's understanding of justice, respect, and leadership. This decree, while rooted in admiration for her, also acknowledged that the mystical signs, the glow of her bones, the divine aura she carried, were proof that the old ways were no longer acceptable. Over the following days, villagers sought Ayana's counsel. Her insight, previously ignored, was now valued. When disputes arose, people asked her opinion first. When ceremonial duties were assigned, her participation was sought not out of obligation but out of respect. Her enemies, humbled by the mystical justice that had unfolded, found their influence diminished. They could no longer wield intimidation or envy as weapons, and even their whispers of malice were met with the quiet power of Ayana's unwavering presence. Stories of the night she walked through the ashes, glowing under the moonlight, became a central tale within the village. Elders recounted it during gatherings, not as a warning of punishment but as a lesson in courage, resilience, and divine favor. Children reenacted her walk through ashes during festivals, each step a symbolic homage to endurance and the idea that strength could be born from suffering. Ayana's story had shifted from one of attempted humiliation to a legend of mystical empowerment and moral authority. Even beyond the village, neighboring communities began to hear of Ayana's extraordinary endurance and the glow that had revealed her hidden power. Visitors came seeking her counsel, eager to witness the girl whose spirit could transform the intentions of fire and the cruelty of others into a demonstration of resilience and divine blessing. The village, once insular and suspicious of anything beyond its borders, now found itself at the center of stories about courage and mystical favor, all rooted in the acknowledgement of Ayana's strength. Through it all, Ayana maintained her humility and grace. She accepted recognition without arrogance, understanding that her power was a gift, not a tool for domination. Her glow, once a symbol of endurance through suffering, had become a beacon of hope, reminding all that the combination of inner strength and ancestral blessing could create a force that no cruelty, envy, or malice could extinguish. In time, the elders' recognition of Ayana's power reshaped the entire culture of the village. Respect became more closely tied to integrity and courage rather than fear and dominance. Acts of cruelty were scrutinized, and humility and endurance were celebrated. Ayana's example served as a living testament. Those who endure injustice with dignity, and who allow their spirit to shine despite adversity, not only survive, they transform the world around them.